You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome, I'm Esther, Awoniyi. Many thanks for joining us. Today's show will focus on pre-election spending in Nigeria and the likely impact on the advertising industry. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther O. Awoniyi. Now, the atmosphere around Nigeria is getting more politically charged as pre-election activity is taking shape ahead of the country's 2019 elections. We'll find out how election spending will impact the advertising sector in Nigeria. And joining me today for that is Lampe Omoyele, Managing Director of 141 WorldWide and Mako Alabi, CEO, Enplug Africa. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Esther.
So it's that time of how do I put it? It's that time again when we go into the political atmosphere where there's a lot of spending, there's a lot of political advertisements on all the media platforms, but of course starting from commercial advertising. But I want us to talk about political advertising as how it differs from the traditional commercial advertising, and how you see it impacting on commercial advertising. Lampe, let me start with you. This time, it's going to be politicians and promises and campaigns. And right now, it's actually become very essential, a campaign strategy for them. They have to be on social media, they have to use print, they have to use broadcast, radio, all the platforms. So, but for you, for political advertising, how do you see, how is it different from the typical commercial advertising? Okay.
So let me start by saying what I see as similarities. Because as you alluded to, the politician, first of all, is making promises the same way that any brands will make promises. Now, the key thing at the end of the day is that the promises that the politicians make are not necessarily products or services that you immediately experience until they get elected. Now, so the key difference is how believable are those promises that they make. That's in one sense. Second point is what's the level of competition that's therefore going on within those segments that they play. Now, typically, therefore, in the political terrain, it's a lot more intense compared to most of our commercial advertising, at least in the Nigerian context for now. And then also, third is how do you regulate the advertising that the politicians make, either on the soapbox, so to speak, or through different media that they advertise in. So a big challenge, a critical difference is the level of regulation that occurs in political advertising as opposed to commercial advertising.
Very good points. Marco, I mean, for political advertising, like Lampe just said, there are all kinds of claims, but in traditional commercial advertising, there's someone, a regulator, to perhaps verify those claims and test the product. But in political advertising, that doesn't happen. Do you think that it's a lot more difficult how it impacts on commercial advertising because those claims cannot be verified? And do you think that it would appear that there are no rules in terms of the form and content of political advertising?
Because APCON is meant to regulate all forms of advertising, and then you have the Advertising Standards Panel that is meant to ensure that all forms of advertising that goes out is regulated, and to that extent, the rules are there and the regulations are there. The question now is, are they followed and are they adhered to? That's really the issue. And remember, APCON was set up by government, and it's pretty easy for government to influence at this point in time what they do and what they don't do.
Do you think, Lampe, it gives commercial advertisers a bad name, in quotes? Because for you, I mean, you have your set rules and you know the rules of the game. If you're going to make claims, there's someone to verify and, and all of that. But for politicians, it's just a different ballgame entirely.
And I think, building on what Marco just said, it therefore speaks to how APCON is empowered to truly perform the role that it's been set up to. And that will require ensuring that government influence is minimal in terms of that. So it's really in APCON's cause, so to speak.
All boils down to the regulator.
To the regulator being empowered and also stepping out and saying, truly, look, we've been empowered to this by act of government, and therefore serve as an arbiter to ensure that the political advertising is is fair and is within the lines and the rules of the game.
Let's talk about the cash now. What we hear many times, especially with the 2015 elections, is that billions of naira was spent or was spent on campaigns and everything that had to do with the political climate. Do we know, are we tracking the cash? Do we know exactly how much is spent? And does APCON, the industry regulator, track this too?
Okay. So first of all, APCON doesn't track.
Well, should APCON be tracking?
Well, not necessarily. Within the industry, there are companies, organizations that have been set up to be able to track advertising spend. So, for example, Media Reach has the Media Facts booklet that they publish, I think, annually. And they've tried to do that at least annually in terms of the amount of advertising spend that goes on in Nigeria.
So you're saying that there is data available?
So there is some data available. It may not necessarily capture all of the advertising that is done in Nigeria, but we do have a fair sense of the amount of advertising that is done in Nigeria, particularly in the context of what we call the above the line, the traditional, so television, radio, outdoor, and press, because that is more easily trackable compared to digital marketing, which is now on the rise. Now, in 2015, in the run-up to the elections then, available data suggests that advertising spend on political advertising was about 5 billion naira. Okay. Now, that's quite significant. Within the context of that year, the data says the overall spend was about 90 billion. So naira. So it means that political advertising accounted for anything between 5 to 10% of the advertising spend that year.
Mako, another thing that, because I remember APCON coming out to say then that the quality and, yes, the quality of some of the material that came out wasn't, there was a lot of material that came out that was not approved. You see some commercials, you see some campaign commercials not approved, and suggesting, taking a shot, as it were, at other political parties. And you wonder, did this go through the regulator? Who saw this before it ended up in this newspaper?
So in the commercial sector, there are fines that are obviously given to the companies, okay? But in this area, it's very difficult to find a politician because, how do you go against that politician?
But he used the medium, either radio or newspaper.
So unless the rules are changed such that it's that newspaper that is now fined, that then you can get hold of them. But usually it's a company that...
The agency,
the company itself that gets fined. Maybe the agency.
Let me just build on that. Okay. So in terms of enforcement, it should be possible to enforce. So first of all, the rules actually require to some extent that anybody who is placing an ad ought to at least indicate who produced the ad. But we also know in this day and age, and that's where the issues around the AAAN, the Association of Advertising Agencies in Nigeria, comes to play, where they also have a similar role. And also APCON needs to also help them to play that role well. But in this day and age, almost anyone can place an ad without necessarily indicating that it's an agency. It could be a one-man person. Now, the key issue, therefore, is the media house ought to ask for the approval of APCON before you place any ad. Correct. Now, if they don't do that, then they are liable to if there's any fallout implications. Okay. So even if they cannot track the person who placed the ad or the agency, then the media house ought to take responsibility.
But does this happen often? And when it does, at the actual penalties, do you hear or see defaulters actually being penalized for that?
Yeah, in the commercial.
In the commercial
space, yes, of course.
Commercial space.
Okay, but when it comes to
less if at all we hear anything at all from the political.
When it comes to political spending.
Yes. Now, you must remember that there's a limit to what a presidential aspirant can spend.
Yes, I know.
And the governorship aspirants, 500 million for presidency.
But you see, the thing is, there's so much money moving around. Yes, on the face of it, it might look like they're sticking within, the stipulated amount that they're supposed to spend or required to or allowed to spend. But you see all these monies, and then Well, we don't do our own we don't do the calculations, but like you said, when you talking about between 5 and 90 billion, it just
In terms of
appears,
total advertising spend.
total. So it comes across as that. So let's talk about how advertising agencies, how you take advantage of the political spend, campaign spending. Now, what I've heard is that many times the contracts are given to agencies outside of the country, and when agencies here in Nigeria are part of it or try to get it, correct me if I'm wrong, that's why you're here to help me understand this better, that when you do get it, it's maybe second or third party agency, setup. Is that the case?
Well, I'll leave
Okay, yeah. So it's the case in some instances, not all instances. But I think it's the case in what we call the significant campaigns. So as you know, there are different levels of campaigns. You have the legislative campaigns, the governorship candidates, and then the presidential campaigns. So what has happened in some previous years is there have been foreign agencies involved in some of the more significant campaigns, especially at the presidential level. Yes, local agencies, Nigerian-run agencies also do become a part of it. But in many cases, yes, foreign agencies have been the lead partners within the context. And I think that's one of the things that the revised APCON regulations some years ago tried to address, that Nigerian agencies need to be lead in a lot of the things that happen within the context of Nigeria, particularly if it's being driven by government. So it does happen, and I think that there is a need for Nigerian agencies to be a lot more involved, especially as lead partners in many of these campaigns.
But in terms of implementation, that isn't happening yet. We're just having these conversations.
Or
acknowledging the fact that we need to change that.
The conversations have been held.
Okay.
The implementation is what you might call 50-50. So you still have some situations where it's foreign agencies and some situations where it's Nigerian agencies. Nigerian agencies are definitely involved. Now, the key issue is how can they be more involved, especially as lead partners for right from the start, especially for significant campaigns.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have to take a short break. We'll come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Lampe Omoyele, Managing Director of 141 WorldWide, and Mako Alabi, CEO, Enplug Africa. We'll continue our discussion right after the break. To join us again. We're continuing our focus on election spending and advertising. My guests are Lampe Omoyele, Managing Director of 141 WorldWide, and Mako Alabi, CEO, Enplug Africa. Gentlemen, thank you for your time so far. Mako, let me pick up from you. Tell us how the industry now is positioning to take advantage of the windfall that will come with election spending.
So the creative advertising agencies are perhaps the ones who are best suited to start with any politician. That's a creative advertising agency, is the person that creates all the content, be it radio, press, outdoor advertising, digital advertising. That is the beginning of the entire campaign strategy for that politician. That's where he or she should start from. And then it now falls out into all spheres. And then you create a budget as to how you're going to get to the constituents. That's in a nutshell.
Do you think that, because looking at 2015, what we had was that 2015 was perhaps or probably one of the biggest years in terms of election campaign spending. Do you think that with the kind of competition we're seeing and how fierce, we're not even there yet, but you look at the newspaper headlines, it's all politics now. Do you think that that money, that amount, could increase in 2019?
I'm not sure it's going to increase because there's not much money flowing around like it was in 2015, but there will definitely be a good amount of funding for the advertising space. Because if you don't spend, it's going to be very difficult for you to achieve a lot in terms of reaching
absolutely.
the constituency.
Money is a key word here. Lampe, your thoughts, as an agency.
So I agree that money is a bit more difficult in this season than in 2014/2015. Nevertheless, as we see the desperation, in quotes, of the political class to win elections, and as you've mentioned, the increased competition, I think that money will be sourced one way or the other. So I think that at the minimum, I think spend will be still the same at the minimum, at the same level that it was in 2014, 2015. I think that what might shift somewhat is in terms of the platforms that will be used. So while television was big in 2014, 2015 and accounted for about 60% of the election spend, what we may find is that there might be a bit of shift onto radio, onto the social media space, and also obviously, as we know, spending money on a one-to-one basis with the electorate. So I think there is an opportunity for not just ad agencies, but for every company that is involved in the communication space in one way or the other. But I think there will be more money will be spent on social media.
Okay, speaking about social media, Mako, what should we expect this time? Because, I mean, the suggestions are we might see that influx, more activity on the social media. And I know that some companies have already been set up specifically to take care of that market for politicians who want bigger presence on social media. What should we expect?
So the social media space has grown tremendously between 2014 and now. More people have smartphones, more people have mobile telephones. The digital space is more reachable. Facebook, Twitter, Google has just opened up sort of 4 locations for
people to
for
access
Wi-Fi.
Free Wi-Fi,
yeah,
so obviously more people.
For free Wi-Fi, okay. So that space is quite a space that a lot of people can reach, but there is spending that needs to be done as well in that space.
Now, Lampe, it would appear that, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, tracking the cash in that space will be difficult. But I'm thinking for those companies who are specifically set up for that purpose, it shouldn't be so difficult for them.
So it is obviously an opportunity for them to do. I think the key thing for many of the businesses on tracking is how do they monetize the information that they have. I think that's always the big issue for research agencies or people who are tracking the ability to monetize. I think that's the limiting factor. So yes, they do have the capability. Well, I think one of the key challenges they face is how they monetize it, because they obviously must make investments to be able to track such data. But I think that the likes of Google with analytics and co are also well positioned to do that as well.
So for a company like 141, what are your expectations in terms of how you also want to be a part of this, either from the digital aspect or just the commercial, regular advertising?
So for us, it's actually the totality of the commercial part, which includes digital, not the measurement of it, but digital as being part of an overall creative strategy.
You will go bigger on digital, would you be tracking to see where the traffic is moving towards to?
So what we will be doing is looking at which are the relevant platforms to engage with the target electorate of our prospect or our client.
Okay.
And so if his or her target electorate is playing more on social media, then we will tilt our communications to social media. If it's going to cut across different platforms, television, radio, outdoors, that's what we do. And it's back to what Mako had said earlier on. Ultimately, it's going to start from what is the strategy, who is the electorate, and how do we best reach
So what you would have to wait first to see how things begin to shape up before. I know you say it starts from the creators, but would they have to wait also and see how things take shape before they begin to say, okay, let's do more in terms of strategy on this side of things versus digital versus a billboard or outdoor advertising, etc.
Yeah, so because it depends on the client. I mean, is the client in Lekki? Is the client in sort of Badagry? Is the client in sort of Zamfara? Is the client in sort of Bauchi? What's he running for? Governorship? Is he running for Senate? And is he running for sort of presidency across, the nation? And you've got to use data, and there's a lot more data available now. So, and what's your budget as well? What's your budget, and what's the competition that you're trying to reach out? And when do you want to start your campaign? Because there is a timeline for commencing
yes.
The campaigns.
Yeah. Now, speaking about campaigns, for outdoor advertising, usually we see the big billboards, different candidates. And on the other hand, on the other side, we do see haphazard, and we just see posters all over, littering, defacing people's walls and buildings. And I know that's in terms of regulation, that's the state government takes. But does that get in the way, Mako?
In Lagos,
if you put up a big billboard of a certain candidate, and just underneath the billboard on a wall, there are all kinds of, posters
all over the place, yeah. So Lagos has led in terms of cleanup, in trying to ensure that posters don't, mess up deface the whole city. In other states of the country, that's much more difficult. But the billboard obviously will have a greater impact at any day. But then, how many people can afford billboards, really? And sometimes it's donated by their supporters as well.
Okay, now Lampe, let's take a look at the industry as it is. We've talked about the strength of the regulator, APCON. We're hoping that this time, in terms of perhaps making sure that all parties play along the lines of the ethics and of the industry, that will happen, or perhaps it will be even more this time around. But in terms of the growth of the industry, where we're coming from and where we are right now, say in the last decade, what would you say at some of those key milestones that the Nigerian advertising industry has achieved?
So I think that there's been growth in the context of the past 10 years. I think the quality of advertising it's had its hiccups, but I think that it's getting better. The regulatory space has, in fairness, also tightened in the past 10 years, and the APCON reforms have also tried to help in terms of improving standards. Still challenging. Before the 2015 elections, there was growth, especially with the economy on the rise. Post-elections have been a challenge with the recession. So 2016 and parts of 2017 were a challenge, but we have seen recovery in terms of advertising spend. So there has been growth. I think that we would hope that the run-up to the elections, that everything goes well, especially in terms of
money spent and money
spending, but also ultimately in terms of being free and fair and being peaceful, so that it doesn't have any negative impact in terms of the economy, because where the economy is hit, it definitely affects the industry.
Now, Mako, I was talking to a foreign investor. They came into the country, they're an advertising agency, and they came into the country, and I was asking him about the operating environment and how the business was going. And one of the things he mentioned as a challenge was how the company was received by, the local players, and how hostile, I remember he used that word, they make the environment for foreign advertising companies to come into the country. And I was trying to just say, okay, so are things better now? And he said no, but it's still a big challenge. What is your response to that?
That is true, actually, because no local player wants the budget to go outside of the country. So that's why they make it more difficult. And the regulation says that, you have to use a local ad agency to do your work. Of course, you can do any creative you want, but it has to sit with a local ad agency. Otherwise, the people in the industry can be overrun overnight when people come from abroad to just start doing the business. So you've got to protect the industry as well.
Are you saying there's no space, no space for, is the industry the market not big enough to accommodate local and foreign players too?
It is big enough. However, what has happened is it's been to the disadvantage of
the local
players. And I think it's really important that we really deliberately grow the industry within the context of Nigeria. It doesn't say that local players don't want to be exposed to global best practices, but our belief is that that should be enabled in such a way that it grows the industry here. And I think that's the key message and the key purpose of the reforms that APCON has driven.
And if you look at video ads, a lot more video ads have been taking place in the last 3 years now on people's telephones through many mediums, through many platforms, newspaper platforms and other agencies.
So, final thoughts. I think we have about 60 seconds left. Lampe, final thoughts. What would you say is that one thing that this industry needs that could make it leapfrog or just change things dramatically?
Improve the level of creativity, and seek to deliver results of the clients through stronger strategy, get a better understanding of the target consumer.
Okay.
And I think that will definitely make a key
Mako,
difference.
5 seconds.
A combination of regulation and international standards.
Best practices.
Yeah, best
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time so far. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show
Esther.
today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been speaking to Lampe Omoyele, Managing Director of One Forward Worldwide, and Mako Alabi, CEO, Enplug Africa. We've been looking at the impact of election spending on the advertising industry here in Nigeria. Well, that's it on today's edition of Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch all previous episodes of the show on our website at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther or Awoniyi. From myself and the rest of the team, do have a great day.